Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Crown Zenith, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the best performing decks at the most recent pair of late night results, and we also have one other online tournament which actually finished today, which had over 100 players, so I thought it was worth looking at as we keep up with the Crown Zenith metagame. We of course have the OCIC. It's actually starting in, I think, 4 hours for me, which is quite a strange sensation watching it on a Thursday night, but hey ho, going to be interesting to follow along. I'm not necessarily thinking there's going to be too many new decks, as we are basically still in the Silver Tempest format with a couple of tweaks here and there, and that's very well reflected with these late night results. We are seeing every now and then some decks spiking the event, but it's still the case of lots of Lugia, as we're seeing with this first top 8. This is the European flight, the earlier late night, where there's going to be, half of your top 8 is Lugia. Then we're seeing Lost Box and Mew also making top 8 placements, but there are other decks popping up with big results, and in this case the winning deck list was an Eldegoss Loop Yveltal control variant, similar to what Sander brought to Liverpool with the Speed Lightning Energy Flying Pika package with Parasol, choosing to play this over the Ice Cube Wash package. I think it's easier for Lost Box to tech stadiums than like answers to Parasol, because even if they have things like Lost Vacuum for removal of Parasol, they don't just win immediately by having that removal. They still have to use their Sableye over and over, and this list is playing Lost City, so you can still Lost City Max Balloon Sableyes and stop them from hitting you. So this is a much more robust defense against Lost Box in particular, whereas if they are playing Temples and such, they can simply find a way to attack through an Ice Cube. So this is kind of the safest option possible, but it is that sort of slower option at the same time. But yeah, this really isn't too different from Sander's list. From what I can tell here, seems to be that core concept of Yveltal destroying a ton of energies and then having your Pika package with Thornton and Nets to pick up everything else off the board all in one go, against the Reggies and against the Lost Box players. Still seems to be powerful, and like I said, this is probably the safer one. And it definitely seems like that revolving door of Ice Cube's just done well, so let's convert to Pikachu. If Pikachu's doing well, let's convert to Ice Cube. So there's going to be a bit of that back and forth in the format to see which is the better way to protect yourself. But a very respectable 9-1-1 record there with the Yveltal Eldegoss. I'm not going to go at every single one of these Lugias because we've seen so many of them at this stage, but we will look at some of the highest placing ones. So we'll check out the second place 60, choosing to play V-Guard Energy as one of their counts. And the 3-2 Lugia seems to be a place that a lot of people are settling on just so they can continue to increase their counts elsewhere. Double Vacuum is becoming very, very popular, and Double Belt is also kind of big just for like mirror match situations more than anything else, and it can be helpful against Mew. So it's not too surprising to see such a heavy choice belt right now, knowing the mirror is so popular that you actually get that value. There were points where belts were coming out of lists because we know that the Lugia matchup can turn one prize in a lot of situations, and Lost Box and Reggies are popular, but now that we've seen like Reggie's taking a small dip off thanks to things like Goodra joining in the format, it makes sense to have more damage mods at your disposal in Lugia, so the belts seem pretty reasonable there. Let's take a look at a top 8 Mew, and this is going to be just a Path-based build of Mew, just 2 copies of Path with the 3 Judge and the Roxanne. No Silene package, so it is what it is. Very high Forest Seal Stone count. I don't really understand this. You already get diminishing returns from having a second copy, so why would you not just play, like, at this point, a Rotom Phone or something over the 3rd Forest Seal Stone? I know the obvious, like, effect is just so much weaker, and this is just saying, oh, I want this so I can slam VIP whenever I want to, essentially. But that's a strange one. And also, such a high vacuum count over having access to Lost City is also really strange, when there is still Reggies around and kind of worth respecting a little bit, but overall a very simplistic Judge Path build of Mew, which is completely fine. And let's have a look at the Lost Box that made top 8. Looks to be a Zama Lost Box that also has a Sky Seal Stone package with Luminion Raikou as well as Drapion. So really interesting to see Luminion for Raihan for Skyseal Stone. It's a really roundabout way of getting there, but it's one of the most consistent ways you actually can establish that Raihan in time to be able to activate your Skyseal Stone with things like Raikou on, Lugia, which is really powerful, and also, of course, you can Raihan for the Seal Stone against Mew as well. So pretty powerful. Zama is really annoying in like Lost Mirrors and for Regis and for Vikavolt. So you really do cover a lot of your bases by just having this one card. And in theory, the Seal Stone is helping out Lugia and helping out the Mew matchup as well. I feel like a list like this would struggle against Goo, and that's kind of the main reason why I'm preferring Zama in a Kyogre-based build, because Kyogre has better answers against Goodra, especially with only 2 rope in the list. But otherwise, I really I'm a big fan of the Zama Lost Boxes for sure. So happy to see it doing pretty well. It's slowly creeping into that metagame. People are coming around to the Zama. I was hot on it from the start and think it's still absolutely cracked. But I think it fits best with Kyogre. But cool to see the Skyseal Stone having a bit of play there as well. Not too bad. Even a Palkia in 9th. Let's just have a quick look at this one to see if it looks... Yeah, looking very similar to the Ian Robb 60 that we've seen lately. So, again, no real surprises there. With that, let's have a quick look at the early metagame. Lugia out with that 30% meta share, which we've seen over and over again. Lost Box in at second. Much more popular than Mew, actually, when you lump the two together. Then Palkia was really popular. Didn't do all that well, though. 17-17-3 as an overall win percentage is not great. The Lost Box that we looked at didn't have any answers to Ice Cube in particular. So interesting that some people are still just being like, meh, this is such a fringe deck. Should I even care? And should I just commit my space to other things? That could easily be an issue with the Ray and other Lost Box variants, that they just don't have the space to commit enough towards things like Ice Cube and Pikachu, so they kind of just shrug and say, oh, if you got me, you got me. So that's a small developing scenario to bear in mind as we jump to the second late night of the week, where the tournament was won by Arcdura of all things. And this is a really interesting Arcdura as well, because it's playing a Flying Pikachu 1-1 line. Not something that we've really seen too much of. This list isn't playing anything like Sharon's Care or Volo so that you can go lone Flying Peak, although it does still play the Parasol. So you have a bit of help here against the Lost Box players, but I would assume that this is quite weak against Lost Box still, because they are playing oftentimes like 3 to 4 rope and sometimes playing boss, and I feel like they could get ways to play around the Max Balloon too frequently for me to feel comfortable about it. Now, is it better than just making a second Dura? Probably, especially with your Marnies. I suppose the idea is that you just buy enough time with Max Balloon that you just win a prize race, especially if they have to go for an Arc, a Flying Peak, and a Dura. That's still like a lot of meat throughout the game, and just forcing them to have more and more can be a little bit awkward. This is playing Temples as well, trying to be a little bit safer against that Lugia, I suppose, where you're going to Temple Parasol your Dura and hope that that combination, similar to how we've seen Goodra go for that line, you can make it hard for them to do shenanigans against you. As we know, Lost Vacuum is probably like a 2-counter Lugia, I would expect, at the moment, so making them have multiple answers to you is pretty important and pretty good. The Flying Peak, I feel like it's better against Regis than anything else, but I don't know if I want to commit spaces to a Flying Peak in this list, to be honest with you. Because it doesn't really... I don't value it too much into Lost Box. I don't think I would be playing it. But Lost Box is one of the harder matchups for Arcdura in general. It kind of normally just plays Lost Cities in hopes that you can run them out of stuff, but as long as they're playing smart with their resources, it shouldn't be an issue for them to beat you. So I understand wanting to patch up that matchup, but Flying Peak does feel a little bit strange. More Mew success, another Judge-based build, this time playing still no Lost City, so people are really low on Regis right now, looks like in the online meta. And people are getting away with other stadiums in that secondary slot. So Crystal Cave being a help against Lost Box players to stop Sableye, sprinkle damage, and also can hurt like Greninja snipe plays and such. And it also is playing that Collapse Stadium, which is still a little bit of help against the Reggie's, but I think it has higher upside into Lost Box, which is why we're seeing these two stadiums come in, because very often it's going to be like Sableye Sprinkle setup plays on Genesect for them to map out their prizes. So denying that with Cave and Collapsed and Big Parasol, like that's a lot of ways that you can try and block their prize map. It's kind of interesting to see. This one's just playing the 2 Forest Seal Stone, kind of more what we're expecting here. Looking like a pretty solid list. Is still incorporating that Oricorio, which I think is, you know, completely fine. We have a Reggie's actually in top 4, doing pretty well. I think Christian's played this at a number of regionals as well recently to high placements. And a pretty interesting list once again. Making some consistency additions in the stadium counts is really interesting. Just a couple of paths, still giving yourself that nod of respect to Arcdura, but giving yourself a few extra percentage points of just getting into the game with one Pokestop, one Stormy. Is playing the Quad Shoes. Is back to the Air Balloon. We haven't seen that for a little while. That's often been Rope or like a Yell Horn to respect the Ice Cues and respect the Goodra even. Yell Horning a Goodra can sometimes be annoying for them. I think that's really why Reggie has dropped off. Like the uptick in Goo, although it's not been that popular, we'll have a look at the metagame in a moment, has put some Reggies off, but it may be a decent time to play it again. Like personally, I think Reggie's a really good play for OCIC because I think there'll be so many people safe betting Lugia that Reggie's could be pretty strong, to be honest with you, because so few Lugias are playing Collapse these days, and I feel like it's a pretty reasonable matchup if they don't play any like slow down options for the Reggie outside of Dunce, which is like kind of fine for you. Let's have a look at the highest placing Lugia from this flight then, from this pod. Actually is a Flying Peak Lugia. We've seen a couple of these sneaking through as well. The Parasol Pika package, just so annoying for so many decks, and it seems like it's over and over again being an option against the Lost Boxes and the Reggies of the world, as these Lost Boxes have got to a point in sort of greed where they just don't want to commit answers to stuff like this. So it seems to be doing okay. I mean, this is the list that obviously can't go lone Flying Peak very easily because it needs to Lugia out Archeops and such. But yeah, so it's really a waiting game for the Lost Box players if they can combine a big Ray turn alongside Rope shenanigans or alongside Rope Boss. There's even been some Ray builds that have cut Boss altogether, so that's going to be a much harder thing to piece all in one go. But also, like the Kyogre builds can try and throw this to the bench, Sableye Sprinkle it, and throw it to the bench again and Kyogre it. So I'm, again, still not a huge fan of the Flying Peak option, but it's actually okay in Mirror as well sometimes if you can Parasol your Peak, and it can be an alternate way to like hit their Lugia with your Peak, and then again you're making them have their like Parasol bounce, their Yveltal turn is forced essentially, so there is definitely merit to this combination, even though I'm not like the biggest fan of it, to be honest. And yeah, just rounded out by more Lugias and Mews in the top 8. We've got something interesting in 10th by the looks of things. This is the Ditto control build, something that we actually saw at the most recent regionals. So this has also got a ton of merit. So we actually have, well, in first place and 10th place, started to see more Cry of Destruction, Yveltal kind of decks, and they've not been particularly popular in the meta standings, but also their win percentage isn't that high either, so I guess they just have to find the right run. Definitely feels like for a deck like Yveltal Control, firstly you need to know how to play it. It's not as simple as just I'm attaching energy and using Yveltal. It's actually more resourcey than that, especially if the Lugia and Mew players are smart about their sequencing and whatnot and how they utilize the energy. But also, it's like if you start losing early with Yveltal Control, you're just going to have a terrible day at the office because you'll start seeing stuff that you really don't want to come up against. Gouda a bit more popular this time around, and Vikavolt also in there as well with 4% meta share, a little bit higher than the last one we saw. But again, the Vikavolt's also sort of caught in this Gouda crossfire where it's a matchup you really don't want to run into because you just have so little options against it. So it's really weird that Goudra's success at Liverpool has basically blocked out Reggie and Vikavolt, which were some of the better answers to Lugia, honestly. Like, I know Dunsparce and Lugia is going to still make it a close game into Reggie's, and obviously with the sort of Skylar era technology, you care way less about Vikavolt using Aero, But Vikavolt using Judge Path is really solid into Lugia, I think, and it's just sort of underutilized in the game. It's just that there's a reason why it's being underutilized, and that's because you have these matchups like Goo and Reggie's holding you back from actually being a deck in the format, and even to an extent, things like Arctura and Control. All of these like tier 2 decks are completely battering Vikavolt, despite Vikavolt being like strong into the big three. So that's a real shame. But yeah, it's sort of it's hindering like Gudra is essentially hindering the progress of this metagame, where there's actually no real counter deck that selects all three of these like very, very nicely. There's enough tier 2 stuff that's like viable, that's really hurting a lot of these decks. I think Yveltal Control is probably the deck that ticks the most boxes on this list. I think Palkia Intel also does a very similar job. It's just it can lose into the big three if they're teching the right things. So it's a little bit more volatile, I would say. So yeah, that's the metagame of the second late night. And then we quickly just I spotted another over 100 player tournament that was concluded today, and it was won by a Lost Box that went 8-0-2. And this is a Kyogre build of Lost Box that's playing Forest Seal Stones over Sky Seal Stones. So it really feels like Sky Stone has kind of been a bit of a flop. We've seen it once today. But still sticking with some V packages going on. Interesting, the one Cram is a cut that obviously Evenov did with Goo, and now it's being done with Cram here. Zigzagoon's not something you often associate with Kyogre builds either, and no Guru in the list. That's so greedy. Guru is such a machine. My goodness. I can't believe a deck that has such a specific win condition isn't playing Guru, especially with like one recycler as well. Oftentimes it can be 2 and 2. So yeah, some interesting takes here with the list. Is playing Echoing Horn though, that's pretty cheeky. Can help you get around some stuff. Is maxing out the rope as well. There are some counts I like here, but also some things that sketch me out a little bit. Mostly no Guru, because he's such a boy, you know what I mean? Such a good chap. And also not making the space for like the one Bird Keeper, which is also like a really solid include. Instead it's just playing like an Air Balloon, which isn't often seen, and is playing no captures either. It's actually really low on energy overall. So the Kyogre combo doesn't actually come off that often with this list, I don't think. With only 10 energy, you're only allowed to Lost Zone 2, and that's only if you've not prized any. Or by the point you've got down to Kyogre turn, you've not prized energy. Because you need 8 in the cycle to attach 3 and Storm 5. So that's super low for a Kyogre list, I think. So that's a real surprise for me. But it did go 8-0-2, so there you go. We got a Mew in second place. Seems like all the successful Mews are Path Judge based at the moment. So many people are playing just high vacuum and no city / anything else. Really surprising for me. I mean, Lost Vacuums are less cloggy, I suppose, because you can get rid of extra pieces in hand. This one's actually playing no cross switches either. It's playing Gears. I would never expect Gears in Mew. My goodness. You already have such good access to all your supporter cards just by digging. And you have Cram fallback. I'm really surprised to see Pokegear over, again, a much more flexible Rotom Phone, or even things like Tracking Shoes just for deeper digs. Really surprised by some of these lists. People are trying all sorts right now in these online tournaments. We have another Lugia. Again, nothing too crazy to report. Looks very straightforward, actually, like a throwback base build. I guess the speed lightning energy is one of the only talking points. But that's pretty nice. Always refreshing to see a higher Lugia count just to get into the game. We have Ray, build of Lost Box, not incorporating the Wash Water Manaphy. Actually, we've seen a lot of people fall off the Wash Manaphy train. I thought it was so good for Orlando. I guess that's just because of like the Sky Seal Stone hype going into the last regional. But it feels like a lot of people have dropped the Wash Water Manaphy, which I think, as a Lost Box player, really puts me off Lost Box. It makes you play so differently. But it feels like everyone's just kind of like wiped that from memory and been like, oh, that's not a thing, so our lists won't change, and we'll hope that we don't hit the Lugias with the Wash Waters. Despite Wash Water being like really, really good against Lost Box if they don't play any techs like this one. This is literally just like Pablo 60, right? It's just like not even trying any new things at all. Again, there's like nothing wrong with that, but it's not like reacting to the times. I would expect like this weekend to see. This is just a copy paste of the earlier late night, I suppose. This one is playing a temple though. It's cool to see. We've got a Vika Aleki as well. We haven't seen this for a while. This is playing some wacky stuff, man. Turbo patches, quad phone for the speed lightning synergy. You know it makes sense. Look at this. This is vastly different from normal Vikavolt. I say normal, I mean like the Vikavolt that uses Mew and Shu. This is Rotom Phone Speed Lightning as a combo to try and power up your Aleki VMAX. Obviously, the ability from Transistor is very solid with Paralyzing Bolt. It's a lot more proactive than the Zigzagoon Net plus Zapdos thing that you have going on. And this has upside for Super Zap Cannon and Raikou being late game sweepers. So I can see why it's like in the deck, but this really just hasn't kicked on in our format. But maybe it's time, you know. Item Lock is solid, and like I said, having going back to this actually, the lack of damage output is the big reason why it's terrible into Goo. So giving yourself a more aggressive option by just being like, okay, I can buff up my Raikou damage and still do something into Goodra, or even just attacking with your Aleki VMAX could be reasonable. Giving yourself more energy manipulation gives you more ways to like chain Super Zaps into matchups like Goodra and such. It's also playing double rope, so it's definitely acknowledging that fact. Let's round it out with another control deck. So yeah, the little old Ditto control deck is actually getting some decent results. I wonder if we'll see any of that at the OCIC. Definitely a flexible deck, and one that I'm sure a lot of people won't have tested fully against. I'm sure people are more aware of like the box of tricks, but this is so unique to the individual of like how they try and map out their win condition that some people may not have just come up against a competent player playing this deck just yet. And you can catch people off guard with all sorts of plays here because you just have such a box of tricks in your attacking threats. Could be really interesting to see this do well as well. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you still participating in the late night tournaments? It's a best finish limit of 10, so don't feel like you have to enter all of these, but I feel like playing maybe 10 or 15 of these over the next few weeks gives you a really good shot of making it into the top 64. So, and you know, there is a trip to Japan on the line, so it does seem like it's really worth keeping track of. In theory, we're looking at players playing lists that they really feel like they can be successful with, which means they should most likely be like finger on the pulse deck lists that gives you a good shot of doing well. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.